How's everyone today? Good. Well, got some rain yesterday, which is good.
No.
You didn't get any?
No.
100.
Oh.
Where were you?
It poured here.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
No, nothing.
Yeah, it was pouring here. We got some rain at my house, which was nice.
Yeah, they were talking.
Well, it must have been real hit or miss because it was a downpour here because,
What time?
let's see, so
3:30. About 3:30.
it was about, no, it was earlier than that because I went and taught the Bible study at Grace Commons. And I remember because I was taking my Bible and I'm like this with my Bible because I didn't want to get all soaked because it was coming down pretty hard. So the Commons Bible study history was at, I think it was at 1.
Oh, okay. Because I was working in the garden from 3 until 6, and there wasn't a drop. And I
Grass
thought
is
maybe
crying.
they were just protecting me.
I know, like I need a bed. I got two. We had, when we took the 52 trees down, the next year, the neighbor next to us wanted to put an extension on the back of his house. Well, because all those trees were down, they could get at it through our driveway, except we had all these arbor vitae, which some of them were almost fully or half dead because the tree line had blocked them from getting sunlight. So like, can we just rip all the rest of these arbor vitae, which were, much taller at that time, can we rip them out and put brand new ones in? So they did, but I got two of them that are like brown. And I'm like, oh, please just be in hibernation. No, I don't think so either. But the rest of them, there's 8 of them. Only 2 of them are brown. So the rest must be getting some sort of shade from something. Protect them just enough. But it's... the green ones, though. The green ones must be getting enough shade to protect them because it's like green, brown, green, brown, green. So, so it's really weird. They're not next to each other, so we'll see. We'll see what happens.
I was in downtown Milwaukee and they came down in buckets.
Wow.
And it was so bad I had to pull over on a side street and wait for about 10 minutes.
Wow.
And even hail came down.
Oh, I know.
And on my way home, I came up Lincoln Memorial Drive and there were a number of trees that were broken over the road. Yeah, so the trees were blown down.
Wow.
As well.
That happened multiple times around.
The Lord answered some prayers, and some prayers He didn't answer.
Yeah, I know. Well, like I said this weekend, God just loves some of us more than others. So, if you're here this weekend, you understood that was that's wrong. So, all right, let's pray. We'll get started. Heavenly Father, thanks for this day and opportunity to spend more time in your word as we hear from Job today, as we listen to what he has to say in response to the suffering he's been through, all that he has lost, and his perspective of it. So we pray, God, that in what Job has to say, you would give us a correct understanding of your role and place in the midst of suffering. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. So we are in Job 29, and we're heading towards the very last parts of Job. And I just want to give you kind of a brief overview perspective of how these next sections are broken up. So you have chapters 29 to 31, which are a unit, and this is Job. So we're going to hear from Job and his discourse, okay? Then you're going to have another guy come into the scene, and he's actually going to speak to Job's friends. And his name is Elihu. And so we're going to have a few chapters of his kind of response to Job, but more so his friends even. After that, then you get into the major section, which is now God's going to speak. And that's going to kind of bring everything back into perspective and give a better understanding of kind of what his friends got right, wrong, Job got right, wrong, things like that. And then there's just a standalone chapter. Now, standalone meaning it fits with the whole book. So it's not like Proverbs 31, where it kind of is its own thing, the woman of wisdom, a godly woman. But this is more kind of like the end words, the final words of Job, Job's response to God, and then God's response back to Job, and God's response to Job's friends. And so that's kind of how Job finishes. So today, we're going to take on all of Job, all of his answers, okay? So Job chapter 29 through 31. As we get into this, just a reminder that we did cover 26 to 28, which was also Job, right? So we could have put 26 to 28 with that, and 29 to 31. In 26 to 28, if you remember, talking about God's greatness over creation, God's infinite power, God's vast wisdom, and then he talks about how God is not the enemy, but it's almost going to be flipped on its head today. So we're going to kind of see Job in a misunderstanding. So this is not a good understanding by Job of God's place in all of this, which would then lead us to God's answer later. All right? Any questions before we jump in to Job 29 to 31? Okay. So Job 29 and 30 form a unit. Okay, so those two form a unit. 29 is going to deal with the past, and 30 is going to deal with the present. Okay, so we'll go past, present, and then Job will explain 31 when we get to it. Job 29. As we look at this, I want you to start to see, in some ways, the picture of how Job sees the past. Because he's going to give us pictures of how he understands the past. The images of how he understands the past. And we're going to see that, well, let's just read the first two verses. And Job again took up his discourse and said, "Oh, that I were as in months of old, as in the days when God watched over me." Can you hear Job's reminiscing? He's like, oh, for the good old days. Right? The days when everything was as it should be. You know, and how many people do lament? Oh, do you remember the good old days? Do you remember when everything was right? You remember when, and we even do that today. It's like the pre-tragedy world versus the post-tragedy world. And he goes, oh, I wish it was the past, the good old days when God was there. He's almost acting as if God was watching over him in the past, but not in the present. And that's going to be Job's perspective on things. So as we go past and present, you're going to see not just his situation, but I want you to view, how does Job view God's presence in the past and God's presence in the present? Because that gives us an understanding of how he views God. Continuing. When his lamp shone over my head, upon my head, and by his light I walked through the darkness. As I was in my prime, when the friendship of God was upon my tent, when the Almighty was yet within me, when my children were all around me, when my steps were washed with butter, and the rock poured out for me streams of oil. So let's just stop there. What are some images that we get out of that section of how he understands the blessings of God?
He was in his prime.
Yeah, he was in my prime. Right? Like, man.
My
body was
translation
good.
says autumn days for that.
What was that?
My translation says autumn days, not prime.
Interesting. Autumn
The
days.
RSV.
Yeah, I don't know why. So the RSV can sometimes try to paraphrase it in words that would have been familiar at that time, that it was translated that way. So I would say that in the Hebrew, prime is probably the better word, when I was in my prime. So when I was strong and healthy, my body had not been ravaged by all sorts of disease and boils and things like that, right? I was in my prime. What are some other things? What are some other images you get there?
Blessing of his children.
Yeah, so my children were with me. Good.
The friendship of God.
Yeah, so you have friendship with God. Think about what that's saying. What would that be saying? He goes, in the days where I had friendship with God.
That he doesn't have friendship with God right now.
Yeah, he feels that relationship is completely strained, right? And they don't have that friendship anymore. There's something that's torn it apart. What else were some of the images you have there?
Cream and olive oil.
Yeah, so you have this, so cream or butter and oil. Okay? Like, did that make any sense to any of you?
No.
Yeah, okay, good. So, what that's talking about is, first of all, just the ease of life. How you could just slide through life, right? Like, the ease of life. The other thing is in order to have butter, you have to have cream, right? And if you remember the promise when they were brought into the Holy Land, is they were going to come into a land flowing with
Milk and honey.
milk and honey. In order to have butter, cream, you have to have milk. It is the blessings. It's the good life. To get oil from a rock. And you're not going to get oil from a rock, right? And that's, it says, and the rock poured out for me streams of oil. Well, oil was extremely valuable. Lighting lamps, cooking, things like that. So saying life was plentiful. I was prosperous. I was living the high life. It was really good. It gives the image of, did you get to see the image of light and darkness at the very beginning? I think it's verse 3. Right? So you see that imagery of light and dark. I was walking through darkness, but you were always lighting my path. Your lamp shone upon my head. Things were good. Okay, continuing. Verse 7. When I went out to the gate of the city, when I prepared my seat in the square, the young men saw me and withdrew, and the aged rose and stood. When the princes refrained from talking, and they laid their hand on their mouth, the voice of the nobles was hushed, and their tongue stuck to the roof of their mouth. When the ear heard, it called me blessed. When the eye saw, it approved, because I delivered the poor who cried for help, and the fatherless who had none to help him. The blessing of him who was about to perish came upon me, and I caused the widow's heart to sing for joy. So now we're starting to see here a little bit of Job. Let's just start with verses 7 through 10, because that gives us a little bit more of the image of what his life was like. And then, as we get to verse 11, we see how and why he believes it was like that. So just looking at 7 through 10, what are some of the other images there?
He was respected.
Yeah, he was respected, right? And notice there was this respect, this honor, and this reverence that he received. And he received it from which groups?
All of them, right?
The young, the old,
Princes.
the noble,
Nobles.
right? Like everybody. And here's an image, and we don't always get this because we don't have this anymore. He goes, when I went out to the gates of the city, when I prepared my seat in the square. Like, what does that mean? So at that time, most cities would, especially the prosperous cities, would have walls, would have a gate. You would enter through the gate. And at the gate, they would actually have a seat. And that seat is where the judge would be, the one who made rulings and pronunciations. So we actually see this if you read the time of David. David's son Absalom goes and sits in the gates and usurps David's power by giving judgment from the gates instead of them going to the throne room, because that was what happened even in a more ancient Israel. It was called the seat of Moses, or the seat of Abraham, that was at the gates. And that's where you would go to receive pronunciation or judgment. An instance of that later on would be the lepers. When Jesus healed the lepers, they had to go and show themselves to the high priest or the chief priest, but at times before that, they would have said, go and show yourselves to the person sitting at the city gates, because if they saw you were clean, then you could go into the city. So that was the seat of honor. That would be where, like, instead of going to the courthouse today, you go to the city gates today. So that was where Job got to sit. Like that was my seat. The nobles moved out of the way. The young kept their mouth closed. The old honored and listened to whatever I had to say. And I was the one who sat there. I was probably the most respected man of the city. Right? So this is his situation in life. We've seen the imagery around that. And now he's going to say why he believes this was. So let's just start back a little bit again at 12. Because I delivered the poor who cried for help, the fatherless who had none to help him. The blessing of him who was about to perish came upon me, and I caused the widow's heart to sing for joy. I put on righteousness, and it clothed me. My justice was like a robe and a turban. I was eyes to the blind, with feet to the lame. I was a father to the needy. I searched out the cause of him who did not know. I did not know. I broke the fangs of the unrighteous, and made him drop his prey from his teeth. Then I thought, I shall die in my nest, and shall multiply in my days in the sand. My roots spread out to the waters, my dew all night, my branches, my glory fresh with me, and my bow ever new in my hand. So what is the imagery of what has he done? What is he saying that he did to almost garner this position?
It's a real helper to people.
Yeah.
Did all good things.
Did good things. Especially the vulnerable, right?
He was benevolent to people.
Yeah. And those were people that couldn't repay him. It wasn't like he was doing things to somebody so he could get something back. I was a fatherless, the father to the needy. I cared for the blind and the lame. I looked out for the widow and those who were perishing and those who, like the prey that was in the fangs of the predator, I actually saved them. Yeah.
Is that okay, or is he acting kind of self-righteous?
Oh, he's acting a little self-righteous. Oh, yeah. We're going to see in his response, his view of why God should allow and shouldn't allow blessings. Okay? So this really is Job's misunderstanding of God. Or at least God's working. We would say it's kind of like the hidden work of God that we just don't understand fully. So, he's like, I did all these right things. I acted with character. I was a man of justice and righteousness. And then in verses 18 to 20 he says, and therefore what I thought is, man, I should have a good long life. My full days should be full of blessing, right? Like I'm going to die in my nest. I will multiply days as the sand, right? I'm just going to have nice days stored up at home, sitting on the recliner, with a good beverage in one hand and a book in the other, right? Yeah. Like this will be great. Because that's how it should have been. Verse 20, my glory fresh with me, and my bow ever new in my hand. Life should have been nice, good, and easy for me. Like that's what I deserve because look what I've done. Like look what I was. I was respectable. I was good. I cared for others. God had been with me. I'd seen all those things. It should have just kept going. Except for this really ugly interruption in my life. 21. Men listened to me and waited, and they kept silence for my counsel. After I spoke, they did not speak again, and my word dropped upon them. I want to read this one to my daughter. Because I can tell you that in my house, my daughter loves to have the final word. Even if nothing else has to be said, how many of you have ever gotten that where you'll send a text and they'll just give a thumbs up back in return? Like you didn't even have to send that, right? Like Jesse's just like thumbs up. Thanks, thumbs up. Really, you just can't let it go, can you? You have to, right? Like, for Job's like, no. They let me have the final word. They understood. They waited for me as for the rain.
We did that too.
And they opened their mouths as for the spring rain. I smiled on them when they had no confidence. In the light of my face they did not cast down. I chose their way and sat as chief. And I lived like a king among his troops, like one who comforts mourners. The word I wrote down in my Bible was, I was the man. Right? Like, isn't that what he's saying?
Yeah.
Like, I was the man. But I was the man because I always did what was just and right and righteous in God's sight. I did exactly what I was asked of. In fact, if you read through the Old Testament, like especially the first 5 books of the Old Testament, you will see that is really what God calls of those who have positions of leadership, is to always take care of those who are most vulnerable. And Job is going, look, this is what you've called your people to do. This is actually what you said, if you read the Old Testament, what you would bless. You promised to bless actions like that. You said this would be favorable in your sight. And so this should keep going. I should be the man. My word should inspire others and change their lives. But that was his past. So now he's going to go, this is what it was. And I wished it always would be, and having a full life filled with days at my home of rest and good times. But that's not what I'm experiencing in the present. So before we jump into the present, any other reflections or thoughts about what Job has to say as he reflects upon his past?
It's interesting that he doesn't actually talk about how hard he worked to get any of the stuff. I mean, it just is very different from today. If you have that much stuff, you're at least going to say, well, I worked hard for it.
That's right. That's right.
He doesn't mention that at all.
No, and to his credit, that means, who does he give all the credit to?
God.
God. He's like, you did this for me, right? Like there are times, I think, in Scripture where we look at things and don't give people enough credit, even if they're wrong. Like Job's wrong, but he still doesn't get the credit that we take for granted today. I think it's like Cain and Abel. Okay? Why did Cain kill Abel? Jealousy over the sacrifice. But did Cain still bring an offering? Yeah, he did. He just didn't bring the best, but he still brought an offering. There are people today who don't even do that. Right? And so he at least did that. I mean, sometimes we take for granted some of those things, but God God doesn't have a higher standard. God has a perfect standard. I think that's what we forget. We can have high standards. God doesn't have high standards. God doesn't say, be semi-holy as I am holy. Try to be as righteous as you can be. He says, be holy as I am holy. And can anybody do that? No. He doesn't have higher standards. He has holy standards. Okay? So that was the past, which is actually, if you think about it, why Job's going to get this all wrong. Because Job forgets how high and holy God's standards truly are. But now.
So was he telling that all to those guys that were with him? Or was he just talking to God when he did that?
Yes.
Guess what?
Oh.
Okay.
Yeah. So there's a part of him that's answering his friends, but I think there's a part of him that's also pleading to God. And I would say in 29 to 31, he's pleading a little bit more to God than he is to his friends. Where I would say verses 27 through 28 is more of Job's response to his friends that God still hears. 29 to 31 is Job's response to God, which his friends hear. So just who's the primary audience there? But that's a good question. Because he is kind of saying, God, this was my past. It shouldn't have stopped. Because now he's going to go into the present. And he says, but now. Right? That's where everything changes. Here's my present situation, but now. Verse 1. But now they laugh at me. Men who are younger than I, whose fathers I would have disdained, to set with the dogs of my flock. What could I gain from the strength of their hands? Men whose vigor is gone. Through want and hard hunger, they gnaw the dry ground by night in waste and desolation. They pick stalwart in the leaves of bushes and the roots of the broom tree for their food. They are driven out from human company. They shout after them as after a thief. In the gullies of the torrents they must dwell, in holes of the earth and of the rocks. Among the bushes they bray, under the nettles they huddle together. A senseless and nameless brood, they have been whipped out of the land. So pretty harsh terms he speaks about this group of people, isn't it? Well, what's he saying about this group of people first? Before we talk about their response, what is he saying about who they are, this group?
They're sons of the fathers that he knew, I guess, that respected him and stuff.
Yeah, so these are the younger men, worthless men, right? Like they don't have any food, they don't have any means, they don't have any strength, they're not worthy of anything, they're disdained.
So, but they're still laughing at him because of what happened.
Yeah. And they're making fun of me. Like think about the complete reversal. In fact, you could almost say this. If you remember verses 11 through 13 and 16 of the previous chapter, what had he done? Chapter 29, 11 to 13 and verse 16, what had he done?
Good things,
Good things to who?
the poor.
The poor and those who had no means. That's this people.
And now they're laughing at him.
And now those that he would have always helped, they're the ones who are laughing at me, as if I'm beneath them. Really, like they would have closed their mouths. Now they're nonstop harassing me. And I'm lower than they are. Think about that complete reversal of fortune. Yeah. And I think sometimes we listen to this with Job and we're like, Job, don't you get it? But how many of us could easily fall into that same trap when things don't go the way we want them to? When life is hard. When we get a number of things that happen all at the same time. Right? A car breaks down, bills go up, groceries and gas are more expensive. We go to the doctor and get a bad diagnosis. Our children make decisions that are really bad. All of this is happening at once and we're like, God, what are you doing? That's a lot like Job.
People usually don't make fun of you or laugh at you when those things happen.
Good thing you're not on social media. No, and that's a good thing. I'm just saying. Well, let me ask. So now, okay, so this might get a little hard for some. If you're a Republican and bad things happen to Biden, or a Democrat and bad things happen to Trump, you do. Right?
Well, politics are different, that's all.
See, but I don't know, because Romans 13. Like, we're supposed to pray for those in authority. We don't have to agree with them. There's a total difference. We can totally disagree with someone and wish nothing bad for them. And then we have people who, like when Biden fell down the steps, were just mocking him all over social media. I'm like, what are we doing? Like, I totally can disagree with somebody. And okay, in fact, I do disagree with a lot of Biden's policies, but I will never, ever rejoice over the misfortune of someone falling down steps, getting hurt. You know, somebody referred to it like this, is, I don't care who the president is, he is flying the airplane. And I was just on one. Who wants the pilot to fail while you're riding the airplane? Hey, nobody. Which is why you can disagree. Like, don't fly at that other airplane, right? Like, but in disagreeing, you still have honor and respect. So the other day, I was coaching baseball, first time I've ever been warned by an umpire. I was not happy with some of the calls. Actually, we had it on video that he made the wrong call, and then I used the magic word. We have it on video. And he did not like that. And the moment he said, you need to stop, I was quiet. And I said, you know what? I do have to honor and respect the position. I may disagree with the calls, but I have to honor and respect. I can't want you to fail or undermine you. And too often in today's world, we do. Like, if somebody has good things, if somebody is successful, if somebody has a different ideological, political, whatever bent to theirs, like, too many people, and I'm not saying all, but too many people want them to fail. I'm like, why? Why would we ever want anyone to fail? They're made in the image of God. Yeah, we could disagree with them, absolutely. At the same time, we should not, right? Like, And it is today. Just stay off social media, you'll be good. It's not adding anything, except if you want pictures of your family. Nothing else good comes out of that. So that's kind of how I would see that, right? And I would say, we do struggle with that. Where we are either the ones that are picked on, or we're the ones who laugh at the misfortune of others, especially if they don't look like us, act like us, vote like us, make decisions like us.
Was he embarrassed because of everything, all this stuff that he did and said, and now?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know if he's embarrassed as much as he is, in a way, questioning why it happened. And a little upset over it taking place. We're going to see that in chapter 31. So we'll get to that in a moment. Because you're going to kind of see Job's summary defense of why he thinks this should not have happened. And how he viewed God. So I don't know that he's embarrassed by it. I think he's upset that it happened.
Well, if I had done that, it would be, I have to swallow my words. And I would be embarrassed.
Yeah.
I
So-
think I would be.
Yeah, maybe. But I don't get that sense from what he's saying and how he's saying it. Especially once we get to 31, I think that'll clarify some of it. Verse 9. And now I have become their song. I am a byword to them. They abhor me. They keep aloof from me. They do not hesitate to spit at the sight of me. Because God has loosened my cord. Now if you remember, that cord is related to the string of a bow. And if you go back to chapter 29, verse 20, he says, my glory fresh with me, and my bow ever new. The cord is ever new in my hand. But now he says, God has loosened my cord. It's not new. I am stretched out and humbled me. They have cast off restraint in my presence. Oh, my right hand, the rabble rise. They push away from my feet. They cast up against me their ways of destruction. They break up my path. They promote my calamity. They need no one to help them. And as through a wide breach they come, amid the crash they roll on, terrors are turned upon me. My honor is pursued as by the wind, and my prosperity has passed away like a cloud. What are they doing to Job right now? Taunting him, aren't they?
Yeah, belittling.
Belittling him. Job is talking about how very vulnerable he is, right? Before I sat in a position of authority, I had blessings, I could care for others, but now I can be attacked, disdained, and destroyed. Even by those who are weak and worthless and have nothing. This is my life right now. And in the midst of this, he only says it once. But you see why Job believed this happened. Did you catch it? Why does Job say this happened? Verse 11.
Because God loosed his cord.
Because God.
Oh,
Right? You just need those two words. All of this happened because God. Now, he does have this right. God is active and involved in every situation there is. God is not disconnected from anything. I think I shared this before, but I still remember, I think it was Billy Graham's granddaughter when 9/11 happened. And people began saying things like, oh, where was God in the midst of this? Well, and she came on and she spoke and she goes, well, you know why? Well, because we've been removing God from the schools, we've been removing God from the government and all this. Well, so therefore God just let it happen and now we want God to show up and he just let it, he stood at a distance and let it. No, absolutely not. God didn't remove himself and go, all right, go at it. God is always present. God is always active. God is always in the midst of everything, which is a struggle for us because then we have to come to terms with God is ever present even when evil happens, but he wasn't the crucifixion. God didn't withdraw his hand when 9/11 happened. He just, Romans 8:28, uses evil for the purpose of good. He creates all things to have a good outcome for those who love him. And what that outcome is, how it works, we don't always know. It's the infinite wisdom of God. Job's going to have to come to terms with that. But at least Job gets right that God is always present. It's not that this evil happened to Job because God said, I'm out of here. God was still with him. Because God. So he blames God. Then verses 16 through 23. And now my soul is poured out within me. Days of affliction have taken hold of me. The night racks my bones, and the pain that gnaws me takes no rest. So physically, he is suffering. Right? Yeah, my body is suffering. With great force my garment is disfigured. It binds me about like the collar of my tunic. God has cast me into the mire, and I have become like dust and ashes. Okay, so a couple things there. What is he saying when he goes, the great force, my garment is disfigured. It binds me about like the collar of my tunic. God has cast me into the mire, and I have become like dust and ashes. Here's the image. He's walking up to someone, you can think with a suit on, and he's grabbing them by the collar, violently, like pulling it together, and just taking it and going boom and throwing them right into the mud. He goes, who has done that to me? God. He goes, God, you're the one that did this. He says, you acted violently with me. I cry to you for help, and you don't answer me. I stand, and you only look at me. It's like you stare at me, but you don't do anything. It's like you're watching my downfall, and you could help, but you do nothing. You have turned cruel to me. With the might of your hand, you persecute me. You lift me up on the wind. You make me ride upon it. You toss me about in the roar of the storm. For I know that you will bring me to death, to the house appointed for all the living. God, you're sending me to my death, and have no concern for it. That's really what he's saying, isn't it? Like, you don't care, and those that have perished before me, I'm next. And you could almost feel that way, couldn't you? In that moment? Yeah. You've lost everything, houses, family. Your body is now being racked with disease, and you're like, well, I guess I'm next. It easily could have been his reaction and our reaction. And then he pleads his case. Verse 24, yet does not one in a heap of ruins stretch out his hand, and in his disaster cry for help? Did I not weep for him whose day was hard? Was not my soul not grieved for the needy? Now he's going back to the past, isn't he? Yeah. It's like I was in that, I saw others in the situation I'm in, and what did I do? I helped them. There's a way, and I don't want to make too much of this, but I think there's a way in which Job is like, I acted more righteous than you did, God. Like when the needy were hurting, I came to their aid. Now I'm the needy one and you're not coming to my aid. And yet that's what a God ought to do, isn't it? And he's saying, I'm wiser than you. And if you remember before, verses 20, or chapters 27, 28, what had Job been talking about? The infinite power and wisdom of God in creation, right? And the infinite power and wisdom of God could know when somebody is in a time of need and have the infinite power to help them, which is what I did, God, and which what you could have done for me in chapter 30. It doesn't. Continuing. But when I hoped for good, evil came. When I waited for light, darkness came. My inward parts are in turmoil and never still. Days of affliction come to meet me. That's that like stirring up of anger and depression and sadness and weariness and just all the emotions that overwhelm them. Verse 28, I go about darkened, but not by the sun. I stand up in the assembly and cry for help. I am a brother of jackals and a company of ostriches. I know that's really not terminology we use lately, right? Nobody walks around and goes, man, I really felt like a brother of ostriches in the company of jackals today. But what he's saying there is, I was left completely alone and abandoned. An ostrich, again, we don't get that image, right? But an ostrich at that time was a very lonely picture. One ostrich out by itself. Very lonely picture. Or jackals where nobody else went. How many of you remember Lion King? Any of you remember Lion King? Right? If you saw the Disney movie Lion King, and before his dad died, Simba and them, he goes, what's that land way over there? He goes, we don't go to where the darkness touches. You remember that? We don't go in the dark. That's the lonely land. It's where the jackals came from, the hyenas came from, right? So that's loneliness. So that's what he's saying. I'm by myself. I cry out. I ask for help, but I'm the brother of jackals in the company of ostriches. I am all alone and nobody is with me. My skin turns black and falls from me. My bones burn with heat. My lyres turn into mourning, and my pipe to the voice of those who weep. Since I'm failing, I'm alone, I'm in pain, I've lost everything, and nobody is responding. He is really painting a bleak, desolate picture, isn't he, of his life?
It was.
What? Yeah. And I'm not blaming him, right? You go through that. But notice the difference, the stark difference, how he viewed his past, and then how he views the present. And in both situations, again, he sees God being present in both of them. Where sometimes, in both of these, we actually act as if God is absent from both of them. So I used this the other day. I don't remember where it was. It was it was the Bible study at the Grace Commons. So we were talking about something. And I said, one of the ways that C.S. Lewis actually pictures how we have a disdain for God is prayer. So I love C.S. Lewis. I don't know how many of you have read stuff by C.S. Lewis. If you have not read Mere Christianity, it is a phenomenal work. Just outstanding. But he has another one that's also one of my favorites. I've read actually more than Mere Christianity. It's called Screwtape Letters. In the Screwtape Letters, he writes a fictional piece of Christian work, literacy, in which he describes the relationship between a kind of a master trainer demon and his apprentice demon. And so Uncle Screwtape, and talking to his apprentice. And they're talking about the patient being a human that this apprentice demon is supposed to lead away from God. And he's giving him tips on how to do it. And in one of them he goes, one of the best ways to do this is prayer. When I was first reading it, I'm like, what? What do you mean prayer? You can't inspire someone to be angry with God because of prayer. And he goes on, and here's how you do it. Have someone pray for something, have a patient pray for something they really, really want. And then, no matter what the result of that is, do not allow them to see God as the answer to that prayer. So as he describes it, the way I've oftentimes used this with youth is this. So you think about a high school senior getting ready for college, applies for the college they want to get into, waits to get the financial aid package in the mail, and prays, God, this is all I can afford. Can you please put together enough financial aid so I can get into this college? And the financial aid package comes back, and it is not enough. Who's to blame? God, why didn't you do this? God, you could have found an extra $7,000. You have all of the resources in the universe at your disposal. God, why wouldn't you help me with this? Right? So unanswered prayers or answered prayers with the word no is God's fault. But the other side is this. You're praying and praying, God, put this financial aid package together. Help me get into this college. It comes back, and it is exactly enough. Man, I worked so hard this year. I'm so proud of all I did to get this financial aid. Now all of a sudden it's not God but you. Notice in both of those prayers, God is not present, is he? God, I wanted this, you weren't there, you could have. God, I got this, but you weren't there because I did it. We do it sometimes. I'm always reminded that so often, so often we pray about something before but not after the event. Right? God, help this person to get through surgery. They get through surgery and then we just move on to the next. Instead of praying in thanksgiving every time we have an answered prayer. Right? Like, how many of us do this, or you did this maybe with your kids and grandchildren? Whenever they receive a gift, when they don't say thank you, we turn to them and we go, what do you say? Say thank you, right? But how many of us pray ahead of time but don't say thank you afterwards? Right? As if God, was there but not really there and not acknowledged for being there. That's Job right now. You did it all. At least he gets that right. But now, God, it's your fault. All these blessings you gave me here, I know you're still here, but man, you turned every blessing into a burden and a problem. And you are afflicting me with what I'm dealing with right now because of God. Because God, right? Like that 2-word phrase, because God. Right?
His spirit is broken.
Yeah. And how can you blame him, right? Like, we're going to get the perspective of where God is and what he's doing. But in all honesty, as a human, I do not blame him at all for feeling this way. You go through this, unless I would say, unless you've gone through something and it's really hard to, there are a lot of people who want to say how to get through something without having gone through it. I would say, who are the best parents? Adults who have no children. They know all the answers, right? They know exactly how to parent children, but they've never had a child. It's like going through a surgery. Unless you've gone through it.
You wear my shoes.
Yeah. I always say it kind of this way. What's the difference between major surgery and minor surgery? Minor is when you have it, major is when I have it. Right? All surgery is major to the person undergoing it. So we have to understand, and I don't blame Job at all. But he's still going to get it wrong. It still needs to have that correct godly perspective of where God is in the midst of this. So now we're going to get to Job's appeal. This is his final appeal.
But didn't this all start because the devil said that Job would give up on God?
Yeah. But has Job given up on God? Has Job turned away and cursed God's name? No.
He's still talking to him.
He's still, that's right.
Well, he's kind of begging him, isn't he?
Yeah. So he still believes in God. He still places his trust in God. He just gets wrong God's work in the midst of this. He gets wrong who's the enemy and who's to blame in this. He's going to get that wrong.
Anybody can do that?
Yeah. That's why I'm saying I don't blame him for it. He still just gets it wrong, but I don't blame him for getting, meaning from a human perspective, I bet many of us would just fall into that same spot. But we also need to be reminded then, because what this is going to get to is the love, the goodness, and the character of who God is.
That's why the book of Job is written for us.
That's right. Because it's going to get into the character of who God is. For us to understand him fully and correctly. So I get it totally why he acts this way. But he doesn't give up on God. He doesn't curse his name and walk away. I mean, even his friends tell him to do that, right? Like, curse God and walk away. But he's still going to get it wrong because he's blaming God in some ways. Right? Because God did this. You could have.
But God did.
In a way. In a way. We'll get to it, though.
Okay.
And we'll get the perspective of how we understand it. All right? So,
I hope so.
we will. I promise. Wait till God talks. So, when God gets the last word. Job 31. Now, this section, it's broken up into 3 different sections. 1 to 12, 13 to 28, and then the end. And so we're going to read those as one big section. And we kind of already see, or this is just going to help us have some clarity on what Job says in chapter 30. Okay, so 1 to 12, we're going to read it all together. What you should watch for in this, just to give you a hint of what to watch for in this, is this phrase. If, then. He's going to do that a lot. Okay? And most of these phrases, most of these times it's if this, then this should have happened. Okay, so we're going to see that. So, 31. I made a covenant with my eyes. How then could I gaze at a virgin? What would be my portion from God above, my heritage from the Almighty on high? Is not calamity for the unrighteous, and disaster for the workers of iniquity? Does not he see my ways and number all my steps? If I have walked with falsehood, and my foot has hastened to deceit, let me be weighed in a just balance, and let God know my integrity. Notice he's saying, I feel like injustice has happened. Let me be weighed in a just balance, not injustice. If my step has turned aside from the way, and my heart has gone after my eyes, and if any spot has stuck to my hands, then let me sow and another eat. Then let what grows for me be rooted out. If my heart has been enticed toward a woman, and if I have lain in wait at my neighbor's door, then let my wife grind for another, and let others bow down to her. For what would be a heinous crime? That would be an iniquity to be punished by the judges. For that would be a fire that consumes as far as Abaddon, and it would burn to the root of all my increase. So what are these if-thens that he is talking about?
He's saying if he really did bad or walked away from the path to God or whatever, then he could be punished, or he should be, he could understand the punishment.
Yeah, so exactly. So if I had done these things, now the first section is if I had done wrong. So sins of commission, I committed what was wrong. If I had done these heinous sins, then I should definitely be punished. Right? We actually see that verses 3 and 4 give that perfect picture of it, or explains it more crisply. Is not calamity for the unrighteous, disaster for the workers of iniquity. If they do wrong, the unrighteous, then calamity. If you work iniquity, then disaster. Verse 4, does not he see my ways and number all my steps? And then in verse 6 says, so let me be weighed in a just balance. I feel like this balance is out of whack. I've done good, and if I do good, then I should get good. If I do evil, then I should get evil, right? This is the basis of his claim. That is literally the foundation of everything Job is appealing to. If I do good, I should get God's blessings. If I do evil, then I should get God's judgment. Okay, so we'll get to that in a second. 13 to 28. If I've rejected the cause of my manservant or maidservant when they brought a complaint against me, what then shall I do when God rises up? When he makes inquiry, what shall I answer him? Did not he who made me in the womb make him? And did not one fashion us in the womb? He says, this is basically the reason I take care of others, because God made us all. We're all made in the image of God. God loves everybody who's made in the image of God. Right? So I don't care if he's my manservant or maidservant. If I do something wrong against him, he takes a complaint up against me, then I should do what was right, because we're both humans. If I have withheld anything that the poor desired, or if I have caused the eyes of the widow to fail, or if I have eaten my morsel alone, and the fatherless has not eaten of it. For from my youth the fatherless grew up with me as with a father, and from my mother's womb I guided the widow. If I have seen anyone perish for lack of clothing, or the needy without covering, if his body has not blessed me, and if he was not warmed with the fleece of my sheep, if I have raised my hand against the fatherless because I saw my help in the gate, then let my shoulder blade fall from my shoulder, and let my arm be broken from its socket. For I was in terror of calamity from God, and I could not have faced his majesty. If I have made gold my trust, or if I have called fine gold my confidence, if I have rejoiced because of my wealth was abundant, or if because my hand had found much, if I had looked at the sun when it shone, or the moon moving in splendor, If my heart has been secretly enticed, and my mouth has kissed my hand, this would be an iniquity to be punished by the judges, for I would have been false to God above. Now he's talking a little bit about sins of omission, right? If I had seen somebody needy and didn't care for them, if I knew somebody was hungry and didn't feed them, if I saw somebody thirsty. This is Matthew 25, isn't it? Blessed are you when you saw somebody hungry and fed them, and thirsty and gave them something to drink, and in prison and visited them, and naked and clothed them. When did we do that to you? When you did it to one of the least of these, you did it to me. But you were on the left. Cursed are you, because when you saw me hungry, you didn't feed me, and naked and didn't clothe me, and thirsty and didn't give me something to drink. Right? These are the sins of omission, where he goes, if I had not done what God had called me to do and had omitted it, then I also would have been guilty. Like, he gets the infinite understanding of the justice and the law of God. To do what is right and to not do what is evil. And he's like, if I had done this, I have no defense. That's verse 14 is what he's saying is if I had done this, I have literally no defense. And then he goes, and if God opposes me, I have no hope. And if I have an idol, I should be judged. So here's all the if-thens. Now continuing, verse 29. So 1 to 12 was sins of commission. If then, I deserve punishment. Verses 13 to 28, sins of omission. If then, I deserve punishment. Verse 29, if I have rejoiced at the ruin of him who hated me, or exulted when evil overtook him, I have not let my mouth sin by asking for his life with a curse. If the men of my tent have not said, who is there that has not been filled with his meat? The sojourner has not lodged in the street. I have opened my doors to the travelers. So I don't know if you have parentheses there. Do you have parentheses for some of those verses? Basically what he's doing is he's saying, he's getting to this last section, and we're going to see, he's getting real more, like, you could almost feel him, like, revving up. Like, he is starting to boil a little bit, like, if this, and then he gives an explanation, and it didn't happen. And if this, and no, they were never hungry on the street, right? Like, now he's actually even answering his own if-thens. Like, now I'm actually going to be the defendant, and I'm going to be my own lawyer. I have opened my doors to the traveler. Verse 33. If I have concealed my transgressions as others do, by hiding my iniquity in my bosom, because I stood in great fear of the multitude, and the contempt of families terrified me, so that I kept silence and did not go out of the doors. Oh, that I had one to hear me. Can you hear his pleading at this point? I wish someone would hear. I am righteous. Here is my signature. Let the Almighty answer me. Oh, that I had the indictment written by my adversary. Surely I would carry it on my shoulder. I would bind it on me as a crown. I would give him an account of all my steps. Like a prince, I would approach him. Now, verses 35 through 37 are super significant. This is what you could almost say is the desperate plea of the broken. It's like, I wish you would hear me. Here's my signature. Meaning, here's my guarantee. Here is my promise. I will put my name to it, right? And when you put your name to it, that's a big deal. When you sign on the dotted line, right? Like, let the Almighty hear me. Just tell me what I did wrong. Right? Do you hear that in those words? Like, he's basically saying, I wish that the indictment was written by my adversary. I'd carry it. I'd bind it on me like a crown. I'd give an account of all my steps. I'd admit to it. Like, tell me what I did wrong. But if you don't tell me, how can I've acted righteously as far as I know. So here's why he doesn't get it right. Because again, he thinks God has high standards. God doesn't just have high standards, he has holy standards. This is why when we make confession of our sins, we confess not just all the sins that we remember, but all those we don't even remember. And don't even think that we've committed or know that we've committed. We confess them all. Because there are many times we sin and we just go right past it as if it's nothing. This is the desperate plea, basically, of Job going, God, just tell me what I did. and I'll put my name to it. I'll wear my sins like a crown. I'll carry it on my shoulder. I will admit to it. I will confess it, and then I will understand. But I don't get it right now. And then he finishes, for if my land has cried out against me, and its furrows have wept together, if I've eaten its yield without payment, and made its owners breathe their last, then, and he's saying it would be just, then let the thorns grow instead of wheat, and foul weeds instead of barley. If I have done this, I deserve judgment. Just tell me, God, what did I do wrong? And that misunderstands God. It's kind of like what we've talked about, and we'll see in the Beatitudes. God's blessings don't come because we act more righteous than other people do. As if our righteousness brings about the blessings of God. But that's Job's perspective. And that is a very worldly perspective that so many of us can easily fall into. Because that's the economy of the world, isn't it? It really just, that's how the world works. If you work a job, you work harder than others do, you produce more at the job than others do, then you will be promoted and paid better than others are. Well, maybe not all the time, but you think you should, right? Or at least you think you should, because I deserve all that I've worked for. And too often we allow that kind of economy to slip into the economy of the kingdom of God and go, because of all I've done and all that I have put into it, I deserve to be paid for and promoted more than others. It again goes back to the tax collector and the Pharisee. Because the tax collector, as I said on Sunday, everything he had done was good. I fasted, I brought my offering, I didn't give in to extortion, I haven't cheated anyone, I didn't commit adultery, I haven't done any of those things. God, look at how amazing I am. And so you should bless me. But the Pharisee or the tax collector got it better because he goes, God, I got nothing. So forgive me. Then even if he had done all of that, it wouldn't have mattered. I mean, it does in this world. God calls us to do those things. Care for others, love others, bless others. But before God, it doesn't work that way. So Job really finishes his last plea. God, just tell me, if I've done it, then I deserve it. But I don't see it. So please tell me what I did. And then the words of Job are ended. Job falls silent. And we won't hear anything again until chapter 42. Chapter 42, Job's words will pick up again. So we will get to Job's words in 42. We are not going to get those today. We're going to save that until after our next two. And we'll probably try to get all of this one next time. This one we might break up a little bit because God says a whole lot that reminds us of who he is, how great his love is, but also how perfect his judgments are. How perfect his providence is, meaning how he willingly works in creation. And then we'll probably split this into two sections because 42 won't stand on its own. So, and that's kind of where we're headed. Any final questions as we finish up the words of Job? All right, we'll pray and then we'll eat. Heavenly Father, we confess when we are like Job and we act in an almost if-then sort of way, believing that if we do what is right, if we do what is holy, if we do what we believe is righteous, if we do what is godly, then we deserve your blessing in this world. We deserve to have a good life in this world. We deserve what everybody else seemingly has, and we wish we did. And yet you remind us that the blessings you store up for us are not always temporal, We will have the blessed life, the good life, the life that you want for us, that is filled with goodness and ease and rest. But that is stored up for us in eternity. And yet we thank you for those glimpses that we see in this world where we are blessed with temporal blessings. But help us to not turn to be like Job, so that when times of difficulty and struggle and pain and suffering come, that we take that as if we have done something wrong, as if your favor does not rest upon us, as if you are causing this great calamity to happen in such a way that you are seeking our downfall. Instead, God, help us to see you as a God who loves your people and continues to work all things for the good of those who love him. Lord, thank you for the food we are about to eat and the hands that have prepared it. May you bless it to our bodies. In Jesus' name, amen.